Here to discuss the investigation into the bomb attack in Palm Springs and also the Mexican Navy ship accident is Greg Shaffer, former U.S. Coast Guard officer and a retired FBI special agent on the elite hostage rescue team. Greg, welcome. During your 11 years in the U.S. Coast Guard, you sailed a tall ship similar to this Mexican Navy vessel. What might have led this ship to crashing into the Brooklyn Bridge?
Well, I did some research on the weather during the time of the incident, and they were 2 hours into what we call flood tide. And in the East River there in New York, the currents run about 3.5 to 4 knots during a flood tide. Couple that, at the exact same time, there was a 10-knot wind blowing in the exact same direction as the current. So you're going to have almost 4 knots of current plus 10 knots of wind, and you only had a few hundred yards to spare to maneuver that boat so that it could go back downriver and get out to open seas. So they could have or should have, I think, left about 2 hours earlier during a slack tide. I think that tide had a lot to do with it. It pushed you to see that the current was running in videos, and then it looks like when you look at the videos that they may have some astern propulsion going. So the engines could have been stuck in reverse. We call it astern propulsion. But it looks like the engine may have been stuck in reverse. Couple that with a 10-knot wind, couple that with a 3.5 to 4 knot current, and then tragedy like this happens.
Now, what I'm wondering, this is the Mexican Navy, right? They have experience in sailing. They've been sailing this ship for probably years. How could this kind of thing have happened? Do you have any sense of that? I know this is a developing story.
Well, again, before you leave dock, you always want to test your engine as well. Any good boat driver will, go forward and reverse on their engines prior to casting off the lines to ensure that the engines are working and function properly. I don't know if they did that. So, if we do find out that the engines were somehow stuck in the stern propulsion, then that would answer your question on how it happened. But yes, this is a training vessel, very much similar to the U.S. Coast Guard's Bark Eagle that I sailed 11 weeks on. And the cadets from the Naval Academy in Mexico spend several weeks on this beautiful vessel prior to graduation to learn, basic seamanship and ship handling skills. So again, the investigation is still very early on. I think it will be found that due to the very fast flood tide that was happening, the high winds of 10 knots, coupled with possible engine failure, that's the result of this tragic incident.
Okay, and this incident, of course, brings to mind the Dali, the ship that crashed into collapsed the Baltimore Bridge last year. Obviously, the Brooklyn Bridge is still standing today, but are there any similarities between these two crashes?
Well, it looks like in the one in Maryland, it looks like that was engine failure as well. So it could both come down to the fact that the engines were not maintained properly, or there's some miscommunication between the bridge and the engine room, where the engines were not put into forward propulsion and they were left in astern propulsion.
Okay, and so just lastly on this topic before we move on, the NTSB opened a criminal investigation last year into the Baltimore Bridge collapse, like we were just mentioning. What's the criterion for opening an investigation like that, and could we see the same with this investigation?
Well, the NTSB definitely takes the lead role in this investigation, and they'll allow a Mexican Navy team to come up from Mexico as well to assist in the investigation, and couple that with the New York Fire Department, New York Police Department, and U.S. Coast Guard. You have a lot of entities in play to get down to what caused this incident. So whether it was human error again, or whether it was a function of human error and the weather pattern and tides and currents and wind remains to be seen. But whether there's criminal indictments coming down on as a result of this accident is still way too early to tell.
Sure, thank you for that. So let's turn to the Southern California fertility clinic explosion. Authorities say the person of interest in this alleged terror attack held nihilistic views, left behind anti-pro-life writings. Can we say we've identified a clear motive at this point, or is there more to go?
Well, I think the motive is very clear. I listened to his audio manifesto that was put online yesterday, and obviously there are some mental issues in play here with this individual. The big question right now that I have is making a VBIED, a vehicle-borne improvised explosive device, a car bomb. It takes a lot of skill, takes a lot of technology. takes a lot of explosive material. I think the biggest push the FBI and the ATF are working on now is, okay, did he have any help? Where did the explosives come from? How did he make the bomb? Where did he learn to make the bomb? It's a very large explosion. Local police department says it's the largest explosion in Southern California's history. So, they're obviously going to see, try to identify if he had any co-conspirators, anybody to help them make the bomb or get the materials for the bomb. But, the biggest issue right now is, how did that VBID get on site? Who knew about it beforehand? How did he make it? Who did he make it with? Where did the materials come from? And get those questions answered in regards to who may have been helping him.
Do you have any sense of how an individual could perhaps obtain materials like that? I do know that some weapons, some explosive devices can be made with household materials.
That is true. Of course, you had the Oklahoma City bomb, which was made with fertilizer and diesel oil. So it could have been another ANFO, ammonium nitrate fuel oil bomb, similar to the Oklahoma City bombing years ago. It could be, just large amounts of gunpowder, gasoline, stuff like that. But there are definitely several household items that you can get online or at your local hardware store with enough quantity can make a significant size VBIED.
All right, Greg Shaffer, thank you so much for keeping us updated and giving us some in-depth analysis on these two developing stories. Former U.S. Coast Guard officer and retired FBI special agent on the elite hostage rescue team.